Welcome to the LPC, 9 months of law learning with your training contract in the balance. But if that wasn't hard, welcome to the compressed LPC, 6 months of law learning with your training contract in the balance. But if that wasn't hard enough, welcome to the Masters LPC, bigger, better, badder and 20% more likely to fail with your training contract in the balance. But to make things even worse, welcome to COVID lockdown LPC, where you will sit alone at home doing law with no friends. No, seriously, guys, it's really not as bad as that. Sorry, I really enjoyed doing that. It's really not as bad as that at all. But I do think back to 5 months ago, and I did feel a little bit like that. So if you're out there and you're feeling a little bit like that, particularly with COVID lockdown still in place, I'm Sanjay Shalat and I'm here to give you a few top tips about how to help you better survive and thrive in the LPC in COVID lockdown conditions, specifically in regard to that. Okay, so with COVID in place, look, there's loads of reasons why COVID is not ideal. And I'm not going to spend any time talking about that because you already know that. What I can say, though, that I think is helpful is we can't do anything about it. What we can do is really lean really hard into its advantages. And it really does bring quite a few advantages. So my top advantages it brings is the lack of commute. So I save a minimum of 2 hours every day, 1 hour in and 1 hour out that I'm not doing. And if you do the maths on that, it's 2 hours a day over 5 days. That's 10 hours a week. That's a full working day every single week that you've just clawed back. Now, you can lean really hard into that and you can do two things with that. You could just use that to study harder. And that may give you an edge in an exam because you'll have just worked harder and you're a hard-working lot. So you know that instinct is there. And I know it is too because it is with me. But I'm going to make another suggestion as well, which is something that I've stolen from Melissa Andrews, who's she's an LPC teacher, but she's also a trainer and a coach working over at Rare Recruitment. And one thing she mentioned is this idea of bookending. So she suggested bookending your day and actually using that hour to do something for yourself for happiness. Because one thing about lockdown is it does depress the happiness levels. And you have to look after that for yourself. You know, we're not going out as much, we're not seeing our friends, but you could take that 1 hour at the beginning and 1 hour at the end of your day and do something fun with it, something that you enjoy. Now, I don't know what that is. Maybe that's going to the gym, maybe that's working out, going for a cycle, going for a walk. I don't know. Maybe that's watching Odd Squad in the morning on television. I don't know. But whatever it is, try and think about taking that time and applying it directly. Because if you don't consciously think about that 2 hours a day and use it, I promise you, it'll just get lost and you won't even notice it's there. Okay, so let's move on to my top 3 tips of things that I think you should do to help your studies, specifically in relation to COVID conditions. So number 1 is distractions. So normally you'd go into a class, you'd sit in the library, sit around with your friends. If you've made noise, a librarian would come and go, shh, you know, and you'd have to like focus down. Unfortunately, none of that's there to help keep you on track. So you're going to find your phone's pinging, WhatsApp, Facebook, and you know the score. So I'd suggest thinking about a strategy to help overcome that. So I've got friends who literally just turn their phones off, chuck it in a drawer for a couple of hours. Personally, the thing I do is I use an app called Productivity Timer app. And what that does is it allows you to do 25-minute Pomodoros. You can look up the word Pomodoro online. There's loads of information about it. And I'll put a link to the app in if I can. The reason I particularly like that app is because when you do those 25-minute Pomodoro slots, it tracks how long you spend on each subject, as well as keeping you on track and keeping you away from distractions. It also then later gives you the data on how long you spent on each subject. And I found that data massively useful in tactically planning my classes, particularly again, because I wasn't in person with anyone else. So I sort of had to do this on my own, and you're going to have to do the same thing. So for example, business is worth twice the number of marks as property is. So you should be spending twice as much time on business as property. And you do have that with the SGS, your classes are double. But in terms of your self-study, that app will help give you transparency on how much time you're spending on each. And if you notice you're spending too much time on one, you can help shift that across. And certainly I know I did that. And I think certainly that certainly helped me in my exam results, which I was quite pleased with. Yeah, so that's number 1. Number 2 is, I've written it down here actually, what have I done? Oh, yes, something that never even occurred to me was think about your setup and your desk setup. So again, normally you'd be in a class, you'd be in a library, you spend a couple hours at your desk, but the rest of the time you're in other spaces. But you're going to be spending a minimum of 8 hours every day here on your desk. All your classes, your interfaces on your desk. So getting your desk set up right for you is going to make you happier, it's going to make you more efficient as well, and it's going to output into your learning actually. So that's things like thinking about, have you got a keyboard, mouse, but it's actually things like, do you have a set of headphones? Like you can get these for $5.99, massively change your learning experience online. Because when you're in a classroom, if you don't have these and you're just using your interface on your laptop will automatically shut off your mic. So your audio if you're using your mic inbuilt. So these headphones can make a really big difference actually, and not very expensive. The big thing I'd say think about is your monitor size. And again, you may not have considered this, and you have to if you're in a classroom. But if you're working off just a normal laptop, which is only 15.5 inches, upgrading to a 24-inch monitor, much better for document handling, much better for interfacing in your actual online classroom, and particularly because you'll be doing your exams. I can again say from personal experience now, looking back, having that larger monitor to do my exam on, particularly in civil litigation where there's a lot of document handling, especially in the drafting exam, certainly helped enhance, I believe, my performance in that exam and other people I've spoken to who had that larger desktop space. So strongly consider that, and I believe you all have grants that you could potentially siphon and ring fence some of the money aside to pay towards that, and I'd strongly consider doing that. Okay, tip number 3. I've got it written down here. Oh yes, get involved. So when you're in an online classroom, it's really easy to sit and, grab a cup of tea and just sort of sit back and kind of just watch it going on and take a kind of a bit of a back seat. And certainly in the early days, I can understand why there might be a bit of an instinct to do that because you don't know anyone else in the classroom. It's not like when you've gone in, you're just chatting with your mates. You've never met any of these people face to face. So there's an extra added level of difficulty there. And what I'd say is do your best to get involved. Because there's something that happens when you get involved. If you're just sitting back, you're sort of in a very passive learning state. And as a result, you're just not going to pick up as much. Whereas if you're actively learning, which I will say right now is one of the biggest downside of COVID, because in a classroom, it'll happen automatically. But here you have to make the active choice to do it. If you're typing things in the chat box, you're answering questions, you're turning your mic on and chipping in, that puts you in a really active state of learning. And that means you're just absorbing everything much more. It's also a lot more fun for you, for your classmates, for the teacher. The other thing is if you think of a question you want to ask it. Do it for 2 reasons. Primarily, you should do it because if you're unsure about an area and you get the question, your teacher is going to give you the exam perfect answer to that question. You're going to remember it because you're in an active learning state. And then when it comes to the exam and it comes up, you're just going to pop it into the box and you're going to type it in and you're going to get full marks for that. The second reason you should do it is if you're thinking it, other people are as well. And other people in your classmates can be grateful that you asked it because they're all going to benefit from that question. I really mean that as well. So really do try and get involved. Don't be afraid of turning your mic on. Don't be afraid of stepping forwards, and doing that. You're all hard workers. I know that. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. But try and keep that active learning state. And I really think it's going to give you a real edge when it comes to the exams, actually. Okay, so they're my big 3 top tips in terms of the learning stage. As a final thing I'd like to mention is social. Now, you're going to enter this, and ideally at the end of this, again, if this wasn't COVID and lockdown, you'd leave it with a bunch of friends, you'd all know each other, you'd walk through the Clifford Chance doors together, or, whatever firm you're going into, and, you'd all be mates together. And it's much harder to do it remotely. And what I'd say is, whilst in person, again, it would have happened automatically, you just find people you gel with, you can still make it happen. You just have to make an extra effort. But it's quite a difficult thing in some ways because it may not be something you're used to. And certainly I wasn't actually when I entered it. So you'll have these little breakout rooms when there's a few of you in there and the teacher isn't there. Turn your mic on. Just chat, and get to know each other, people. Just turn the mic. That's the biggest thing. People who maybe didn't turn their mics on perhaps just haven't made as many friends because they just haven't turned their mic on. Just do it, guys. And the other thing I would say to do is don't be afraid to reach out to people outside of that. Either that's WhatsApping people directly, but certainly for me, one of my things is I start to pick up the phone and just call people. And as a result of that, I've made some really good friends. And what's really strange, actually, is that I've got people in my cohort now who I will hand on heart say, they are my friends. I know them really well. I speak to them every single week. I've never met them in real life. It's kind of weird, isn't it? I've got, non-IRL friends. I'm even used saying the phrase IRL because I'm spending so much time online now. I'm using the acronyms, But don't be afraid to, or I would encourage you if you can to try and make that extra effort and make friends outside by just reaching out. You can still arrange online coffee dates. I did that, where you sit and meet for coffee before a class, just on a video chat and all this sort of stuff. There are other platforms you can use. I set up a platform on Discord that was was used for a while. That's obviously, we're not using that now because we're on our way out. But I can obviously send the links to that sort of setup if anyone's interested in that and wants to sort of take it over. Okay, great. Be assured that the next 6 months, while it's going to be hard work, none of you have a problem with that, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't hard workers and intelligent and all that sort of stuff. What I would say is try and be mindful of taking those extra steps, and be mindful of the other things that are specific to lockdown, in that they'll be specific to you. And when you come across them, think about them, adjust them, and don't be afraid to acknowledge them and just sort of address them. Okay, great. Nice to meet you all. I'm Sanjay. Feel free to say hi when hopefully I meet you in person in 6 months.